All right, Nick. Hey, technical difficulties, we're restarting. But we're back. Who was our guest?
Oh, yeah. Well, we got to let them know that we did just have like 20 minutes of conversation and then realize that the audio is not working. So,
yeah.
We're back. Our guest.
Gives us some great introductory talking points to get into this.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. So, yes, our guest that we talked to last week was Richard Schell. He's a professor at the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania, and he is in the Business Ethics and Legal Studies department.
Yeah. Goes through a nice little spiritual journey, and I think that lands him back to a teaching career through law school that's pretty interesting. And so tell me your first, especially after we're coming off of 20 minutes of good conversation, just give me your hot take impression on the role of conscious in, personal codes and values, I guess. Because I think that's where this book is trying to take people, that your conscious kind of contains the code.
Yeah. So following this conversation and really thinking about the book being The Conscience Code, Lead with Your Values, Advance Your Career, I'm just like, I want to learn so much more about the conscience and what people have done in terms of research on like the development of the conscience.
Can you just give me a quick, if you were to define, just on top of your head, conscious, just give me an attempt. We will not claim that this is right, but what would you say your conscience is? Because it's kind of wild to think about, right? It's so, it so well,
yeah,
but you so can't define it.
Angel devil, that's literally all that comes to my mind to best explain it.
Here's a way I'm gonna just I'm gonna put this out there as a starting point. It is the first 25 years of life downloaded and consolidated into your brain that will inform the next 75 years of your life.
Oh, yeah. And
it's like a consolidation of all your lived experiences and your perceptions and your interpretations of things. And I think, because at 25, they say your frontal cortex is completely formed and your development of your brain is done.
Yeah, they say late 20s.
Late 20s, yeah. So I think at that point, you're locked in and you are who you are for the most part. Mm-hmm. Not saying that you can't build, but the core value conscience system, whatever that may be, I think has been informed enough that now you're set on okay, now go be a functioning part of society.
Yeah, but then the added layer is the millions of years that our brains have evolved and developed.
Yeah, I think we come with a lot of... I heard this really fascinating description, actually, and I think this is a really interesting way of thinking about it. It was about the development of a human, in the cycle of going from two single cells to birthing a child, right? Mm-hmm. And what they were talking about was that there is no proper way for a child to develop. What you get is you get two pieces of code in DNA, and they come together, and they have starting points and they have ending points that are written into the DNA, but the way that is executed in between is completely up to the way that biology plays out. So your blood vessel will run from your collarbone out of your neck down your arm, your brachioradial artery, or I think is what it is, through your arm. And that's the one that people get right over their bicep and stuff. Mm-hmm. Or it's either that or right in under their armpit. Either way, the starting point is set. The ending point where it'll get to is set, but where it goes through muscle, above muscle, under muscle, completely predetermined by the phases that you're at in your development. Mm. So if your arm muscle develops first and it hasn't come far enough down, then maybe your vein in your bicep is a little more closer to the surface. Mm-hmm. And it'll always find its way to the right end point.
It's a good metaphor.
So I think that in the terms of conscious, I think that we have this starting and end point, but there's like this we're at this preloaded historical anthropological like baseline of what we have. Our body over the next 25 years is going to go through a process that's going to take us to this fully formed human brain. In the middle there, I would say this is where nature plays a role in how we are getting to that. Mm-hmm. And I think all the influences of our environment are going to play a huge factor in, what experiences and, potential traumas and all this other stuff are going to influence how you form synapses in certain areas and how you like generate the certain parts of your brain that trigger for certain types of emotions and certain types of responses, and how you learn to develop and cope with certain types of responses. I think those are all a result of the feedback you get from your environment.
I like that.
But biologically, you're on an A to B path.
Do you think we have an end date?
What do you mean an end date?
Some people believe in like the destiny of like, you're born with an end date.
I don't believe in that.
I guess that's the answer.
There it is.
I asked that question. But there's another question I have. Of course, our brains have developed, and we think about a lot more now that our brains are larger and there's just more processing going on. But do you think our like conscience is much different compared to, say, that of like a caveman?
I would say it has to be, in my opinion.
Can you elaborate?
I just think that I'll give you like an example of why I think if we ever were building on our conscience from the past, we have to still be building on our conscience and our subconscious. Like our brain development, I think like with it traits from the past that were so ingrained. For example, the natural like ingrained fear of snakes is a real thing in all primates. And there's a reason for that. And I think if that made its way through the developmental series of like then till now, I have to think other things are being added to that. Mm-hmm. So.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Mm-hmm. It was just a thought that popped in.
Yeah. Well, you were, before we lost all hope and our technology went kapooey, you were bringing up the idea of Pinocchio.
Yes, because you brought up the idea of like our conscience being heavily influenced in the role of like identity and like identity formation.
Yeah.
And I brought up Pinocchio because it's a great story that tells the story of a young boy trying to kind of navigate his own life and his identity. And he has Jiminy Cricket, his conscience, and then he's got Geppetto, who's kind of a role model in his life.
Yeah.
And he goes on this journey of like really wanting to venture out and test the waters. Mm-hmm. And he can see that like his conscience is telling him something that's wrong. And so then he experiences negative effects, and then he follows his conscience when it's right and it's positive effects. And it's just interesting that he has these, he has his conscience developed, and he still kind of tests it because he still like tests his identity. He doesn't know what it truly is yet. And I think that's one of those cycles that kind of feeds off each other too, of like, we know what we need to do almost, but we also want to experiment. So like his conscience was telling him what he needed to do the whole time. Right. He didn't need to go out with that guy. I don't remember the character's name. Yeah. But who turned into like the jackass.
Yeah.
And he didn't need to do that because Jiminy Cricket was telling him no. Mm-hmm. But he silenced Jiminy Cricket, was rebellious during those phases because he still didn't know his identity. Right. And then came back and was like, okay, I know who I am. I know what I need to do. Yeah,
it's interesting how you bring up a good point. I think that identity and conscience co-develop simultaneously.
Yeah.
Like you betraying your conscience is maybe a pivotal identity formative moment for you, right? To go out and do something maybe you felt like you shouldn't have done. And then you get the feedback from your environment of that situation, and that helps inform your conscience.
Right.
For future endeavors. I think that's a good parallel.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because sometimes I think our conscience won't always be right. Like, I think if you've grown up in a certain environment that's not helpful for you, your conscience might be skewed one way or the other that's not adaptive for you.
Yeah.
And if you're pushing
Okay, here's a
against
question.
that, yeah.
On that last topic you just hit, where do you think the line is between your conscience betraying you for yourself versus or carrying out actions that you are going to perform versus interacting socially with others? Do you think there's a difference there? Do you think people are more aware inherently that I know what's good and bad for me, I know what's pain and pleasure to me, but when I go out and I'm interacting with others, I'm disconnected? Do you think there's a bit of that going on?
Yeah, I think.
Do you think it's conscious related?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do. Well, I think about the thing that popped into my head was dependency, and how like sometimes when you're in a relationship, like it could be a family relationship, you're like with a parent, you can be very dependent on your parent, and they can be very dependent on you as well.
Yeah.
And that can be super positive. And at the same time, there could be kickbacks, right? Like there could be challenges to that. And if you think that your conscience is telling you that, okay, I need to stay in this dependency, then it's going to keep giving you that like positive feedback loop of like, I'm going to give you positive feedback if you do something that is going to promote this relationship. But sometimes you need to kick up against that to start to separate yourself and individuate.
Well, I would say, I'm going to take it back to your Pinocchio example too. I think in a situation like that, there would be some co-development of the identity and the conscience within that framework that then may not translate outside of that framework.
Yes.
Right. So then to like bring it back to what we were just talking about, I think that then like creates gaps, I guess, in you may still know what is right for you, and you may even have your own opinion outside of that relationship. But then, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Because right. I think I know what you're saying of like, you know that the dependency is still wrong. Or it's not completely
But it's part of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's partly right, but it's partly wrong.
Right.
And so you test the waters, and then maybe that's partly right. But then again, going back to the dependent relationship, it's wrong. And so you feel this give and take.
And you can't translate that as part of your identity out into the world and it won't play out the same in other scenarios. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges with our conscience, or at least personally, like my conscience. I think trying to find the balance of like, what do you do to serve yourself and also serve others? Like, how do you prioritize yourself and prioritize others? It's a challenging process of like, so in my program, they always talk about self-care and prioritizing self-care, and it's very necessary. Like, I'm glad that they talk about it because compassion fatigue's a problem and the work is very hard. And at the same time, I don't know, it's just a weird balance of like, man, I wish I didn't have to prioritize self-care. Like, I wish that could be something that I feel like I get supported on regardless.
Right.
You know? But it's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would even say like with the compassion fatigue thing, I feel like that is potentially a symptom of something else going on, right? Like if you're feeling compassion fatigue, it may be a lack of like, I think I said this in our pre-crash recording, but not feeling like there's anything going on in your daily life that's moving you as an individual closer towards a better version of yourself. You know? And I think there's a negative feedback going on where you don't feel like you're so desperately trying to help somebody else, but you may not feel like what is going on is helping move you forward at all. You know?
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not in this, but like there's a stagnant, like nature of like getting so in the repetitive rhythm of being a psychologist.
Yeah.
You know, it becomes very mundane and like repetitive if you're not like able to find the joy and the excitement of being engaged in it every day.
Right.
Which I feel like can be hard to maintain. Yeah, so I think that there's a piece of being a psychologist in and having some of that compassion fatigue that I feel like may be, like, to your point, I think, like more of a need for self-care in a sense. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to feel like that need is missing, I guess.
Well, so what I said was true. I do stand behind that. But I think what I was trying to say with this, like trying to find a balance with your conscience of like supporting yourself, is like when you have to make the choice to say, simple example, your friends want to go out and you think that it's going to be really great. Like you can go out with them, but at the same time you're feeling exhausted. Like, and you think that you really need this night to yourself.
Yeah.
Like you just need to recoup. But you think it'll let them down in a certain context. And maybe they need support at that time. Maybe it's a friend who is really struggling with something. But maybe you're really struggling with something.
Yeah.
And you say no because you want to prioritize yourself. Is that something that's good for your conscience? Is that something that's bad? Should you take that time to go out and make that decision? This is the piece that I'm kind of talking about.
Right. And I think that my answer to you is like probably one of like the simplest and easiest things, but the hardest thing to convince yourself to do in the moment is like, I don't think we do a good job of like just having that conversation.
Yeah.
You know, like that could be a complete dialogue with the person that you feel like you're going to let down.
Right.
You know, and then let them engage with you. Hey man, I am feeling, you know, like I really need somebody there for me today. And then you're like, all right, you know what? I'll put you like ahead in this situation because like I can tell that you need it. Or you can be like, dude, we're just going to grab a beer. Like it's not a big deal. Then it's like, all right, cool. Then I got to tap out.
And if the person reacts negatively, then is that just a sign for them that maybe they're not in a process that's very beneficial for them?
Could be. I love the saying that if you're not like, or maybe I don't have the saying right, but like the idea that if you don't put yourself first, you're only half-ass helping everybody else because you're not at your best.
Yeah.
You know, so like, yeah, I mean, I think there's a really fine balance to strike between like what you are willing to do and to contribute to others within your like circle and making sure that you have the ability to take the time for yourself when you need it.
Mm-hmm. I think this ties in beautifully to our conversation with Richard Schell about his story. I think, so if you didn't listen to the episode, as Brendan mentioned before, early on in his life, he grew up in a military family, and at the time of like after graduating high school, he said he identified as like a pacifist and did not agree with war, and this caused a little bit of turmoil in his family, and just some ruptures in those relationships, and he ended up going kind of throughout the Middle East on this like spiritual journey to find himself. And so he had this value of like being a pacifist, and he stuck with that. But he ended up like going through these different religious practices, reading the Bible, living in a Buddhist monastery, and really just taking the time to reflect for himself and finding like something that he highlighted a lot was that family is something that he really values and was really important. And he came back and had a very positive relationship with his family. And I think this is what we're talking about, of this like co-developing relationship between the identity and your conscience. Mm-hmm. Like his conscience was telling him one thing at the beginning of like, I'm a pacifist. This is how my family identifies. Like, I don't think we can coexist. Mm-hmm. Leaves and returns and is like, wow, like these two things can coexist. Like I can identify this way, and maybe I can still value them. And of course, that's beautiful ending. That's not how all things end like that. There's still some people that are very set in their beliefs and don't end up meshing well. But at the same time, I think there was this like journey of his conscience and understanding what his values are and saying like, hey, like while this was something that I was against, like military family, I was against it. But just understanding that like, okay, this is who I am. These are the things that I value. Coming back and appreciating that, he was able to develop over time this sense of value, this sense of a new formed conscience. It's crazy.
Yeah.
This like ongoing process. Cause yeah, I don't know. I think that's my hardest thing with this is like my conscience feels so innate to me, but how much is it is nurture? Like it just feels so true to who I am. But that's also because of like how I've been developed.
And you only ever get to know one experience.
I have powers.
I don't know what that
No,
means.
you're right. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought. Like, and so here's something that I'm curious about based on what you were just saying too. Can, as we're talking about this identity conscience relationship, do you think they're both reformable?
What would
Through psychological intervention, do you think and I guess this is more my question because I think this is where it really, would make sense. As somebody's trying to reshape their identity, do you think their conscience reshapes with it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I do. I think that it can. I see it like on a continuum or like an ongoing process as well. Of like, it's not going to be like, cut this dry, start fresh, right?
It can be built upon.
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to more so be like.
Okay.
And I think that's why we just see like maturity. What is maturity? How do we describe maturity? It's like getting older pretty much, right?
Yeah.
But it's also, I think, more understanding. And the more you understand your previous life, I feel like that's just going to enhance like your understanding and awareness of what's going on today and how it's showing up. And it can maybe inform some positive aspects of your life.
Yeah. Okay. So then now let's get back to like the way that this manifests in like these career settings and the way people are progressing through their job. How do you think in the modern age people are like, because the subtitle on this book is Lead with Your Values, Advance Your Career, right? So it implies that leading with your values is that key that is going to get you to the promotion that you want. Do you think people do that in the modern era, and why or why not?
I think people have values of like really helping other people, but sometimes that just gets dismissed. I think it gets blanketed, and I think we go back to this like talk about capitalism and like people really wanting financial success, and maybe it's that they want financial success so that they can provide for their family, and so the act is service in a sense, but at the same time they're not making the right decisions in the business world,
right,
and they're not being ethical, and that's the problem. I feel like there's just like the incentives are for money and financial growth. The incentives aren't for cooperation and like leading with, okay, I want to help this person. Right. And I think that's where there might be a disconnect.
So let's dance on this moral dilemma for a second, because I think a bit of what you're alluding to as well is that businesses inherently don't always do what's best. They're there to make money.
Yeah.
And so if you're truly leading with your values, is your leadership of your values just to do, like, should we be looking at this within like the existence of my department within the company? Or should I be saying like, why would I lead with my values in a company that's out there polluting like BP or something, you know?
Yeah, I think it's interpersonally.
Okay.
That's how I see it.
So you think that like as long as people are trying to make, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but putting positive, a positive foot forward within your interpersonal interactions within your job, is the best way to maybe long term, right? So I think maybe, the bigger case that you may be making is that if everybody in every position thought that they were going to put their best foot forward in everything that they did, companies' outcomes would just be better.
Yes.
Regardless of what their industry was. But if we just try and focus on like, the advancing your career, acting it for selfish reasons and doing all that, then we're going to continue to make selfish, like macro decisions as individuals.
Yeah.
I like
what are
that.
your thoughts on that?
I like that. I agree with that. Because I was originally thinking like, well, why would somebody even work for a company like that? But then it's like, but then you can't really change the company, right? Well, but then I was like, okay, well, maybe you can, because if enough people are doing the right thing at BP, maybe they genuinely can make a transition in 40 years or however long to fully renewable energies instead of crude oils, right? Like maybe good people in companies is the only answer to really actually making meaningful change in organizations.
Yeah.
Having somebody who's willing to lead with their values, advance their career, but also like continue to align the corporate missions with truly societal values.
Have you seen the movie Klaus?
No.
It's an animated movie.
Oh yeah, I have.
Years
I have.
ago.
About Christmas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful quote that Santa Claus says. One true selfless act of kindness always sparks another. And I just think if people, like what you're saying, if people do that in their interpersonal relations at work, like just be a good person to other people. Like when I have a positive interaction with a coworker, it does really help my day.
Yeah, of
Like,
course.
It really makes me like, oh wow, like this is a good place to be. Like I can be here.
Yeah.
And if I have enough of those, if I have multiple of those throughout the day, I'm like, damn, like this is nice.
We're flowing.
We are.
Yeah.
Like, this is something that I want to be a part of. And if there's just more of that, then I think people are just going to in turn be happier and in turn hopefully produce good work, unless they're unless the larger mission is really messed up and people are just like, let's keep vibing.
Right.
But I think there's something to that. And I think that's something that he highlights in this book too, of like, if you've seen something that's wrong, call it out or consult with somebody about it and let's try to work things out. And at the same time, like, be a good person.
Yeah. And be collaborative and get other people involved in the positive things you're trying to do, because that in return shows that like your value system can be trusted.
Yes. Yeah.
And people can look to you to make the right kind of decisions.
Yes. And I think something that we've talked about in the past too with like Dr. Coget is talking about conflict and how we get this like cognitive dissonance just rolling when we avoid conflict and let it pass, and then comes up again and we're like, well, we did it last time, like let's just let it pass.
Yeah.
And if we don't address it, then there's going to be a bad culture and we're going to feel internally like we're not following our values, and that creates this like really negative dissonance that's going on.
Yeah.
And so one of his rules is face the conflict. And he breaks down how to do that. And he doesn't just say like, yeah, you need to call shit out.
Yeah.
It's like, we know it's not that easy. But addressing this conflict so that we can stay true to our values and lead with our values it's ideal. It's ideal.
It is.
So, Brendan, how you feeling?
Feel like I'm gonna lead with my values, and it's gonna be a conscious effort.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah. How are you? I mean, with the whole idea of like the forming of conscious, I know we talked about this a little bit already, but when you are thinking about like the idea of conscious and how it plays into like the decision-making processes, that are like going to happen at work, let's say. How do you feel like that interplay is like taking shape in like workers' daily lives? You know?
Yeah.
Do you think we identify it as conscious when we're making decisions in the workplace?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Well, actually, I don't know. I work in a psychological field, so I feel like it's
Maybe,
hard
yeah.
for me to say.
Yeah.
Maybe people don't feel the same.
Yeah. I think people often take on like almost like an alternative personality that they have to take on at work. You know?
Yeah, do you think there's like a work conscience?
Maybe. Maybe we're just more willing to like tune down certain sides of our conscience and like be the person that we have to be there, but that person in our mind doesn't have certain values.
I think this is kind of what I was saying too earlier is like I could do something unethical in the workplace that maybe would advance my career.
You're a monster.
Right. And maybe I'm doing that because I need the pay raise to better support my family.
Right.
And of course, there's probably a better way to go about that.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, what if like there's that conflicting identity in the conscience, and maybe there's that work conscience of like, this is what I need to do.
Right.
And I know it's wrong, but I also know that I'm going to be serving these other people that are very close to me.
But I think the difficulty I have with that argument is that like, I don't think most people will find great comfort in doing the things to serve their family that hurt a bunch of other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like making a bad decision, like to lay off, be the guy who's got to go lay off a factory of 40 people because it's going to get you that pay raise.
Right.
And I don't know how often that actually plays out in a good way.
Yeah. And yeah, I think
only in the most unethical of workplaces, I think, does that happen.
Yes. The majority are doing the right thing.
Or there's like this status quo type of a thing that everybody's just like bought into. So like this is the way business is done type of a thing. And it's not a career maker. It's not a career ender. Like these are just the things people have to do. But yeah, I think that there's a element to conscience that is, I don't know, like there's a difficulty, I think, especially because and we kind of talked about this before. I don't know that I have full confidence that everybody's conscience is grounded in really solid values. I think there's a lot of people who did not have the benefit of growing up with like a great value and support system who I think have a hard time making good decisions in the workplace.
Right. That's definitely true.
Yeah. But I don't think we recognize, and I think that's the case that is being made in this, is like lean on your value systems, at least the parts of your value systems that are like good and supportive, and it will be a benefit to you because people will take notice. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if like there's a way for people to, and like how people would go about developing their value system in a way that is going to meaningfully impact like their conscience and the decisions that they make. I think that's hard.
It is. And maybe that's why it's so like the companies that do really well do a really good job, I feel like, of establishing that, of like establishing what their why is and what their values are as a company.
I don't think, you know what? I really love a lot of Simon Sinek stuff with the why. Man, I don't know. I feel like society's moving away from that.
How so?
I don't know that your why as a company matters anymore. And I'll tell you that I think that it's because your company's why doesn't matter. It's does your company pander to society's why enough? I think that matters more than your individual company's why.
Yeah.
Like, are you green enough? Because people won't support you if they feel like you're being an asshole to the planet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like, are you supportive of, injustices in the world? Because if you don't, you're not going to be a company people want to work for. So that's a company. And I think we see this with all the biggest companies. Like I'm sure there's a lot of people who mean it and a lot of companies that mean it, but there's a lot of companies that put out press releases when tragedies happen that are just to like check the box of like, we showed that we cared.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that is just a clear sign of the times that like a company's why doesn't matter. It's, does a company take the right actions to support society's why? As misguided as it may or may not be.
But I think there's something that's translated when you have a founder or like a management system that is really leading with their values in that company.
Sure.
And I think a why is something that
I think whys can be a great cultural tool.
Yeah.
I'm curious if it will lead people to success in the modern day.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your definition of success too.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to be a big company? Do you want to just be a small town shop that's just serving the community?
Yeah.
Like, that might be a success, right? Like, not making a lot of money.
But the hard part is some industries, like if you don't grow, it's so hard. Like I just imagine companies with like products that don't need to be replaced. Like you buy it once and you're done, right? And that are competing in markets where there's a lot of other options. Without size and scale, you may not be able to gain the recognition of others to stay afloat. Because somebody else is going to get bigger than you and they're going to be able to have the economies of scale to offer a better value proposition than you are.
Yeah.
So staying small, boutique, and high end is very hard, I think.
Yeah, it is.
So it's like, yeah, I don't know. Because then Amazon comes in and Amazon basics that, those products. And then all of a sudden, like nobody buys hangers anywhere else anymore.
No.
or batteries or whatever.
One too, so
yeah. And then you get it on Prime, shipping. You're ordering stuff already. So, you know what I mean? Like, so I think it's hard to not have to some way play into like the financial success piece.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
Because that's why businesses exist at the end of the day, is they make money. Yeah. They solve problems, but they make money solving problems.
They solve money problems.
Yeah. Yeah, they're solving an individual's financial problems. Yeah, I don't know.
It's tough. And
yeah, it's extremely complicated.
Yeah, that's one reason why he's writing the book.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like the reason for a book like this is because there's so many people who I think do have a good, strong conscience and like have a good head on their shoulders and just like get into a business and like don't really know what the hell they're doing or like where they're going to fit in. And I think what better message than just like lead with your values, like stay true to your values and who you are. People will take notice and it will benefit you in the long term, right? Yep. Because the people who prove themselves to be untrustworthy, unethical, not willing to work hard, not willing to make the proper sacrifices, like all of those things are going to be deal breakers for other people. But if you make a mistake but show you're willing to then make the sacrifice to make up for your mistakes, you'll be fine. If you recognize somebody else for having a good value, you're going to make a bond with those people that they're going to know that's maybe a shared value. And then that's going to help you if maybe that person gets a promotion. Maybe they'll look to you as somebody to promote in the future, right? Yeah. So there's so many benefits to having a good, honestly, like public value system out there.
Yeah. I like the way you said that. I think before we end, I'm curious. You said that a lot of like commodities are replaced by better commodities, pretty much, like by better items.
I said they're more easily overshadowed, I guess would be a good way of saying it, by somebody who can do it for the same thing for cheaper.
Right.
Yeah.
What's something that you own that is something that you've had for almost ever that you've never needed replaced?
Yeah, they're not very common.
Is there something that you can name? I'm curious. Like, I want to know if there's like an item that is just like,
I mean, they're sentimental. They're sentimental things. I mean, but it does come down to like the physical, I would say, the physical material world, right? That's what we're talking about. But I'm trying to think of what, I mean, to be honest, I didn't own just like many things in general for such a long time. You know, I haven't had like, I don't know what at 10 years old I would have had or bought that I would have kept and still been using now. I either would have grown out of it or, so yeah, like fair point. There's not a lot of things that do strike that chord, but I also think that, you know, we also are we're two young individuals. I think the answer for somebody who's in their 50s is very different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
So yeah, I don't know.
One thing that's timeless.
What's that?
The Armchair Scholars podcast.
Oh, a nice piece of modern literature.
Yeah,
maybe.
A book.
Yeah.
A book. I have like a whole cabinet full of children's books.
Yeah.
That I used when I was a kid. You know, no one read them to me. I just started learning how to read when I was like 3 months old. It was
They
crazy.
just spoke to you?
It was crazy. Yeah.
Wild
Stuff.
All right.
All right, thanks for making it this far.
Yeah.
We appreciate the 41 minutes of listening, or however long this is.
Well, we've been talking for an hour,
but it's a little more than that.
Yeah, a little more than that. So,
but next guest, it's kind of on the same route as talking about leading with your values and in a business setting, but in a different way at the same time. A good twist on it. So stay tuned for that next week, and have a good night. Morning, day,
toodaloo.
Middle of the night, whenever you're listening. Last words, Brendan?
Shout out to all the people listening in 2024.